I've made it no secret that I utterly adore the Second Doctor's era. Just classic story after classic story, stylistically wonderful and never-ending fun, utterly compelling and highly underrated character work, and the best Doctor we've ever had. I could gush about it all day. It's just absolutely incredible. But could it have been better? Sup! So today we're going to be analysing the lost stories of the Troughton era. And by lost stories I mean the unmade scripts and plot ideas that never got adapted to TV, not the episodes that were actually made but then subsequently wiped by the BBC. Those are missing episodes. Don't get them mixed up. You know, the typical YouTuber thing with the Lost Stories is to tackle, say, the Lost Season 23, or the Unmade 4th McCoy season. And both of those have been done on Whoniversals for the record. But your 60s purist boy Maddox here is going to tackle Troughton, okay? Not only will I be analysing these unused ideas in all their varying stages of unbirth, but I will also be comparing them to the serials which actually made it to air, and trying to consider whether I would have preferred any of their unmade brethren in their places. This should be interesting. Let's get started with Season 4. We're kicking things off with the Hounds of Time, which would have been a 4-part adventure in Season 4, written by Brian Hales. The plot would have concerned Ben and Polly's kidnap at the hands of robotic hunters, 2 of many abductions which they have performed on humans throughout all of history, taking them to their masters on the planet Terran. With the Doctor in pursuit, he discovers a lab set up there, with the scientist and his warlord determining which point in the Earth's history it would be the most optimal to invade. Hales apparently came up with this concept around the same period when he was writing The Smugglers, and because of the transitional period that the show was undertaking around this time, it was loosely defined so as to fit either the outgoing First Doctor or the incoming Second Doctor. The idea only ever reached this brief outline though, with it never being seriously considered for a slot in the series and no scripts being produced. And probably rightfully so, honestly, because while the idea is a solid and intriguing one, for this specific period in the show's history, I don't think it would have worked, and it's entirely due to the dynamic of the Doctor, Ben and Polly. It seems odd to consider this, but Ben and Polly's close proximity to the Doctor was honestly incredibly crucial to this transitional period between the show's leads. With the First Doctor, they were basically carrying the entire episodes themselves, due to Hartnell's failing health limiting his role further and further. And so to produce an adventure which puts the companions in a kidnap situation and forces Hartnell's Doctor into an extremely proactive role this late in the game would have almost certainly been a recipe for disaster if you ask me. On the other side of the coin, while Troughton himself as an actor was certainly more sprightly and capable of carrying this premise solo and with ease, Ben and Polly sticking close to his newborn and mysterious incarnation and acting as the audience surrogates to help him win over the skeptical viewers was arguably essential to Doctor Who's continued survival. So, who knows what effect that a tale like this that largely separates them would have had on the show in this extremely delicate period of time. As I said though, there's nothing wrong with the core concept in a general sense, and if the story had been slotted for maybe a bit later, say around the point of the Macra Terror, it would probably fare much better, but obviously I'm not going to sacrifice the Macra Terror, or really any other story in this season just to have it made, especially since we know so little about it. Another potential story was The Imps, a 4-parter planned to be the 5th serial of Season 4, written by William Ems. The only known plot element involves the titular imps possessing the ability to generate spores and aggressive vegetation, with them using it to attack the humans on an Earth spaceport. This one actually reached pretty close to production, as Ems was commissioned to write the complete scripts for all 4 episodes, after the story that was initially intended for its slot, The Underwater Menace, was temporarily dropped from the schedule, meaning that this was set to be the 3rd story of the Troughton era. There was just one minor issue though. Innes Lloyd and Jerry Davies had made the last minute decision to keep Jamie McCrimmon, a supporting character from the prior story The Highlanders, on as a full-time companion, and so the scripts for the Imps had to be hastily rewritten to accommodate his inclusion as part of the TARDIS team. However, Ems had fallen very ill in the meantime and was unable to oblige, meaning the Underwater Menace had to go back into production, and it resumed its slot in the era. The Imps still had a chance at life, having been rescheduled to be the following adventure, but it was eventually sacrificed in favour of the moon base. With the Macroterror also coming into fruition, and Ben and Polly's departure being planned for the Faceless Ones, it quickly became clear that the only way the Imps could survive would be if the scripts were substantially reworked to reflect these casting changes. But alas, Ems was still too ill to complete the necessary alterations, and thus his sophomore tale for Doctor Who was abandoned. It's a bit of a shame, but ultimately I think it was for the best? Like, the concept sounds corny and fun, but no way in hell would I want it in place of like the Macroterror or the Moonbase, not in a million years. I mean, I wouldn't really object to it replacing the Underwater Menace maybe, but at the same time I don't feel strongly enough about it. Judging from the details about it, as well as my thoughts on Ems' other outing for the show, I imagine it would have been relatively harmless but ultimately disposable fluff. Just like the Underwater Menace itself, but maybe less memorable. I wouldn't mind hearing a Big Finish Lost Stories adaptation someday though. Oh, and speaking of which, Ems later reused elements of the script for his 1986 Sixth Doctor Choose Your Own Adventure book Mission to Venus, so it sort of gets a happy ending I guess. I don't know, I've never read it. And now we tackle one which sort of ended up reaching the small screen in some fashion anyway. The Big Store, written by David Ellis and Malcolm Hulke for Season 4. The tale concerns the Doctor and friends finding themselves in a department store, which has been infiltrated by two alien species, a master race and a slave race, the latter of which lacking an identity and posing as the store's mannequins, followed by them stealthily kidnapping the store's employees in order to transform themselves into duplicates. Upon finding out that the Master Race aliens intend on colonizing Earth and wiping out humanity with a plague, the Doctor convinces them to leave in peace. Man, that sure does sound kind of similar to a second Doctor story that actually reached our screens. And there's a reason for that, because this is basically the beta test idea for the Faceless Ones. Ellis and Hulke had worked on this concept to a brief by Jerry Davis, but upon receiving the submission, both Davis and producer Innes Lloyd, while thinking the idea had potential, recommended some changes. This involved streamlining the villains so that there was no master-slave dynamic, extending the format from the initially intended 4 episodes to a beefier 6, and for the setting to be relocated to an airport. Ellis and Hulke complied, overhauling the idea and eventually ending up producing the Faceless Ones as we know it today. As an avid fan of that outing, as well as personally approving of like pretty much every 6-parter out there, I wouldn't have this any other way. The last 2 submissions for Season 4 came from the future producer of the Pertwee era, Barry Letts, and these 2 ideas should sound rather familiar to you if you're a fan of the Third Doctor. The first one was called The Mutant, where the Doctor would have encountered beings with an intriguing evolutionary life cycle. It wasn't fleshed out beyond that brief summary, and script editor Jerry Davis turned it down, but as you probably guessed, Letts ended up commissioning Bob Baker and Dave Martin to flesh out the concept and bring it to life under his own reign on the show, and it came to be Season 9's The Mutants. I think the idea works fantastically in the very politically charged Third Doctor era with its themes of apartheid and racism, so I think holding it off for the 70s was the best move. Letts' other story idea didn't have a title, and was simply described as involving an evil organisation operating on Earth under the benevolent disguise of an amusement park. Letts eventually fully expanded on the concept when he wrote it as a Third Doctor audio in the early 90s as The Paradise of Death, which I've not heard for myself, so I have no real stance on the matter whatsoever. Ooh, this video is getting a bit beefy, so let's call it quits here for now. But to recap, the Lost Story ideas for Season 4 seem pretty justified in being abandoned or remounted, honestly. I don't really yearn for any of these to exist. Oof. But yeah, anyway, I'll see you next time for Season 5. Let's see if my tone changes.